All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to CAPI cohort meeting number 9 for Dutchess County. I want to start off by jumping right in to the agenda. So we're going to start off today with a presentation that I'm going to give on the CAP, as well as some of the high impact action items and some of the resources that we are providing for you to make this CAP process a little easier. And after that, Caroline is going to jump into emissions reduction forecasting in ClearPath. Then we are going to break out into smaller groups. I have aligned you all with 2 other municipalities. So 3 groups of 3 to have kind of mini cohorts or buddies during this climate action planning process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then I'll end with homework. So with that, I will jump right into my presentation because we have a pretty busy day today.
Oh, wow.
All right, hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm just gonna minimize this so hopefully people won't see it on the recording. Okay, great. So first off, happy Climate Week. I know it's a busy week for many. There are a lot of great events going on. Happy to provide more detail if anyone's interested in attending events and not sure what's going on. I have a extensive list. Of note, on Friday is car-free day. So if you haven't already made the pledge to avoid driving if possible, you can do that online. I believe it's the Office of General Services, and you just Google car-free day. You can pledge. You can sign up there. There's also National Drive Electric Week starting on Friday. I know lots of municipalities are doing events around that, including my own village, Hastings on Hudson. So it's a great opportunity to get people excited about going electric. I wanted to welcome Emma and Alana, who are new CAPI team members. It's great to have them aboard. Just a quick reminder, we are 2 weeks away until the end of the quarter. So if you could update your hours in SharePoint, I'd appreciate it. I'd say we're about 2/3 of the way to meeting the match for the grant. And once we meet it, we don't need to be tracking our hours anymore. So that will be, I think, a huge relief for everyone. But in order to get there, we do need to continue to track for this past quarter. So please don't forget to go in and into SharePoint and do that. And lastly, just a quick note, we were planning on meeting in October in person. I believe it's October 18th is our next meeting, but we've pushed that to November 15th. So the October 18th meeting will be virtual and the November 15th meeting will be in person in Millbrook. Okay, so as I noted, we're going to start just with some climate action plan basics. I'll talk a bit about the stakeholder meeting. That is really the next big milestone in this CAP project plan and something that is a really important part of this whole process. And then I'll be talking about strategies, otherwise known as high impact actions by sector. There's a lot to go over here. I'm happy to take questions. You can throw questions in the chat. I also am happy to set up another meeting by sector if you'd like. So let me know if you'd want to create another meeting, and I'm happy to make that happen. Just to note, the sectors that are set up in ClearPath and the sectors that we're using in some of the tools are not completely aligned. So the municipal buildings and facilities sector in some of our tools, the HVRC tools, include streetlights and traffic signals, as well as wastewater and water treatment facilities. The vehicle fleet or transportation sector includes employee commute, Solid waste includes both recycling and composting. And lastly, natural resources and land use, I believe only the village of Rhinebeck included in their greenhouse gas inventory. It is quite common for government operations climate action plans to include a section on natural resources. So we have provided some resources for you to think about in creating that section. It's optional, but if you find it something that's important to your community, you obviously can include it. Oh, if everyone could please mute. So basically, a climate action plan, a government operations climate action plan. And again, just to be totally clear, there's also a community climate action plan, but we are just focusing on government operations, as we did for the inventory. And that is a strategy document that sets goals and outlines a set of initiatives that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It uses the emissions inventory as the foundation, and it defines reduction targets, provides a framework for achieving those targets. It identifies priority actions and facilitates coordination among government departments. And lastly, it's meant to be closely followed, but it is a non-binding agreement. So a municipality can and is actually expected to adjust the strategy if the targets are surpassed or not fulfilled. So from a climate smart communities perspective, and there is a link here to the document so you can look at it yourself if you're interested, but it is important that these 4 requirements are met in order to get points for the CSC program. It must be based on the results of a greenhouse gas inventory. It must include a set of prioritized initiatives for reducing emissions. It must include at least 1 reduction target, and it must include a public outreach component if you are going for those extra 4 points, which we are. So you have to include an opportunity for the public to review and comment on the draft climate action plan. Although it doesn't say how much time is needed, I think at least 2 to 3 weeks, but ideally more 4 or 5 weeks to allow people to have time to read the document and to give feedback if they want. Then there are also expectations. These are not requirements, but they are highly recommended or suggested in the program. So they would like for municipalities to establish both short and long-term targets. So in doing so, it makes sense to start with some of the low-hanging fruit and lower cost options, and then move towards the more expensive, more challenging projects. Again, just a recommendation, doesn't have to be this way. It's also important to align with other plans that the municipality has underway, any municipal goals or projects that are binding or on the radar of the current administration. Obviously, that's important to understand. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The outreach planning and execution is really encouraged. That is why I've provided you all with the public outreach and engagement plan, which was your homework to fill out by today. Hopefully you all had a chance to do that. They expect cross-department involvement. They offer a lot of resources around disadvantaged communities, and that's why there's a section in the template, which we'll be going over at our next meeting, around climate equity. And they're encouraging you to not only learn about, but to align with the state goals. So those are the CEL-CPA goals. We've talked about that in the context of the inventory, but we'll be going through those again. And then lastly, a resolution that states that the climate action plan was officially adopted by the municipality, again, is not required, but it is recommended. It's a great way to emphasize that the municipality is taking the plan seriously and is supportive of it, and to make sure it stays on the radar of the administration. Okay, So just moving on to the stakeholder meeting. So between this meeting and our next meeting, the expectation is that you will hold either one or multiple stakeholder meetings. The importance of these meetings is that first, it's an opportunity to listen and communicate with those who will not only be responsible, but in some cases accountable for many of the strategies / actions in your CAP. So it's important to allow for feedback for the draft actions that you're considering and consultation. These are sometimes difficult meetings, sometimes they're wonderful, depending on the support that you're getting internally. But I know for some municipalities there has been pushback, so I'm happy to talk a little bit more about your specific situation if you are concerned about these meetings or you want more guidance on how to structure them and how to address some of the pushback. I'm also happy to be at some of those meetings if you'd like. So just let me know and I will find room on my calendar. It's also an opportunity to provide a reminder on the value of this program and of climate action planning in general. All right, so prep work for these meetings. First, as we've already discussed, I encourage you to fill out the public outreach and engagement plan. That will, as you undoubtedly already know, will allow you to really think through who the stakeholders are, who partner groups could be, how you're going to get the word out about this process and communicate with the public. There is a stakeholder meetings guide, which I'll be talking a little bit more about later, and hopefully this will provide some really in-depth guidance on these meetings. There's also a climate strategies workbook, which specifically focuses on the high impact actions that you might want to consider for your draft prioritized list. Again, I'll be talking about that in more detail later. So completing any draft research, that's important, especially as it pertains to these high impact actions or strategies that you might be recommending. Deciding on the meeting list, the invite list, that seems very basic, but it can be a little tricky, so I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I also recommend that you reach out to your mayor or your village manager or whoever is the CAPI municipal lead on this project. They can then reach out to the department heads to explain this process, the climate action plan, and the meeting agenda. I think that sort of facilitates this meeting success and oftentimes can be a real recipe for success in these meetings. So I know we've talked about that in terms of the inventory and how important it is to kind of plant the seed early and involve the right people. And I can't overemphasize that enough. I think this is a really important time to reach out and just make sure that you have the support of your municipality, especially the board and the village manager or the supervisor or whoever is the kind of lead municipal employee. And then lastly, emailing the stakeholders an agenda, meeting request, and materials upfront for them to review. All pretty basic, but just wanted to make sure that that those kind of milestones are and requirements are covered. And then in terms of whether to have one or multiple meetings, there are kind of two pathways to thinking about this. The first is to draft the list of high impact actions by sector, and then to meet with each department separately to gather input, and then hold a final meeting with head staff to finalize the plan. That's obviously a time-consuming process, or can be if you're in a large municipality, but might make sense if there are a number of people you want to invite to these meetings. Another option, if maybe you're a smaller municipality or you think that everyone's so pressed for time that they would prefer to have one big meeting, is again to draft the the list of actions, and then to meet with all the department heads together to gather their input. And then again, to hold the final meeting with head staff to finalize the plan. In either case, you're going to be having 2 meetings, one at the beginning and one at the end. Some of you might want to consider doing these virtually. Obviously, it's, I think, more oftentimes more successful or impactful to do this in person, but again, you know, this is just something to think through with your CAPI team as you think about next steps. Here's kind of a sample agenda. And again, I'm happy to provide more detail. I'm happy to be at these meetings. I'm happy to help you with the deck or review your deck. But maybe you would start with the program overview and where you are. We're pretty much midpoint in the CAPI process. So you can talk about what's been done to date and where we're going from there. The program value, I'll talk about that a little bit later. The sector by sector inventory results. I think that's critical, is what your inventory is telling you in terms of next steps. And then some climate action plan basics. You can even use the slide that I just showed you earlier in terms of what is a climate action plan and why. You'll want to talk about the target goals and the timing for your climate action plan. And of course, the proposed high impact actions and KPIs by sector. KPIs are key performance indicators, and I'll be talking a little bit more about those later. There also are co-benefits for each action and lead actor. Again, you might not want to get into too much detail on these meetings, but I think the key is what are the actions that you're recommending and you want feedback on, and what are the KPIs that are associated with those actions. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So in terms of the project value, you know, you can use this slide. You can use it as just sort of a sample starter, so to say, to generate ideas. But really, I think the value of doing a climate action plan is for the municipality to provide the community with examples that help inspire community-wide action. So it's really establishing and positioning the municipality as a leader in climate planning. Also, the CAPI cohort model strengthens institutional learning and knowledge sharing. And again, this grant-funded CAPI projects is providing support, guidance, resources, and technical assistance. It's providing ways to save costs and increase revenues through grant funding. And lastly, it's building municipal relationships with neighbors and with Dutchess County. So this kind of hits on not only the benefits of the plan, but of the CAPI process itself. So in addition, for preparing for the stakeholder meeting, there are guide sheets. I put these all together in kind of one document, and it's up on the website called Stakeholder Guide Sheets. And basically this is a bunch of prompts and information. So it talks about who is involved, who should be involved with each meeting, things to know ahead of time, some questions or prompts for the meeting to get the discussion going, some potential KPIs. Again, I talked about that earlier, these key performance indicators, and then resources associated with each sector. And I'm going to be going through this document in more detail. Okay, so the strategies themselves, you know, I think it's intuitive to think about these as high impact action items, but ultimately in the ICLEI template, you're going to see they're called strategies. So, you know, just don't be confused. Strategies and actions, they're the same thing. It's just different terminology. Okay, so just some thoughts behind how to choose your strategies. Clearly, the guiding goal here is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. However, there are co-benefits to these different strategies, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then clearly, an important factor is how realistic are these actions. If it's something your municipality will never do, then you know, clearly it's not worth putting in. If they're maybe already underway, or there's been another plan produced that also emphasizes or recommends these actions, then there would be good ones to add here as well. And then how much do they align with existing goals, and is there interest? Again, the idea is that you want to pick actions that I think really motivate people to get involved, and of course that ultimately are the most provide the most reduction for greenhouse gas emissions. These are just, again, thought starters, so you don't have to follow this recipe, but just important things to think about at this point. All right. I will move forward unless anyone has any questions. Oh, looks like there are some questions in the chat here. Let me just look really quickly here. Oh, no questions. Okay. Okay, so moving right along. So I'm going to talk about the tools. I'm going to start with this climate strategies workbook. So this is an Excel spreadsheet that HVRC has produced to help make this process easier for communities. In the introduction to this workbook, and again, this is online, and I'll show it to you a little bit later. There are goals. So a goal, just to define goal, it's an overarching result that you wish to have, and obviously usually reducing emissions, and there may be one goal per sector or perhaps a few. The objectives, this is kind of one step down from the goal, are kind of in broad strokes how you're going to accomplish the goal. And there could be multiple objectives per goal or just one. And then the strategies are the actual specific actions you're going to accomplish to reach the objective. And there can be multiple strategies under objectives. Key performance indicators are how you measure if your initiative is on track. So they're very specific, achievable targets. Right, they should have specific measurable goals by a certain date. Sometimes it's tricky to measure emissions outcomes. So not every KPI is going to be a number, but sometimes, if you really think about it, you can come up with a KPI for most every strategy. Then the workbook looks at emissions reduction potential for each of these strategies. It's a best guess based on talking with experts. A lot of this came out of the DEC research done. It's, again, not supposed to be a set in stone kind of an estimate. If you disagree with it, you can definitely change these. They're meant to be reviewed and edited. And then ClearPath will also provide more specific potential. Caroline's going to be talking about ClearPath's emissions forecasting by action later today, and clearly that's an important component as well. And then, yeah, the DEC's climate action planning tool, which is pretty integrated into the spreadsheet. And then the notes look at the reasoning behind the reduction potential. And obviously the emissions reduction depends on many factors. So it's really impossible to, in many cases, to make an exact estimate. Costs, these are rough estimates best suited for communities with populations under 40,000. When you get into some of the larger communities, it's even more challenging to estimate cost. But again, nothing's set in stone here. And these are really just best guesses based on our knowledge, and also using the DEC's climate action planning tool. Okay, so that's the strategies workbook. Then there is the climate action plan template. This is the document that ICLEI has produced and provided. It's on the website. I'm going to also be uploading it to everyone's SharePoint folder, as I did with the inventory template. And this is what you should be using to create your CAP. Again, the terminology is such that there's an overall goal, there are objectives, and then there's strategies or supporting strategies. And for each of those strategies, there are KPIs, reduction potential, co-benefits, and a lead actor associated with those strategies. I'm just introducing this to you now. We're going to jump into the document, the template for the CAP at our next meeting. You know, for now, I think it's important to just really focus on coming up with that draft high priority action list for your stakeholder meeting, and you know, one step at a time. But just so you know, the template does provide for this concept of co-benefits. And just to go over these very briefly, the first and most obvious one, and I think probably the most relevant for many municipalities, is the cost. Is this strategy saving money for a municipality? And if so, how much? And there's a sort of little piggy bank icon associated with that co-benefit. Does it enhance resource security? So basically that gets to diversification, resiliency, redundancy, and the little icon there is a tree for that. Does it create jobs? That's the world icon. Does it improve public health? And you see the apple here. And then does it deliver benefits to frontline communities? And by frontline communities, that's generally synonymous with vulnerable communities. So if you've taken a look at the template, you'll see that it's broken down by sector. So you'll see under buildings, for instance, and facilities, a potential objective is to increase energy efficiency. And under that, a strategy might be to develop a strategic energy efficiency plan. Associated with that strategy is a benefits or reduction potential. In this case, we have kind of 3 icons to represent that there is a high reduction potential for this strategy. Lead actor would be the village manager, and the metric or the KPI is that the plan is adopted by a certain date. So again, just an example, but to kind of get you familiar with how the template is structured, and how to think about these different strategies. Then in a different section, the template addresses the co-benefits. So again, getting back to the strategy, develop a strategic energy efficiency plan. The co-benefits for that strategy are all of the 5 co-benefits. So here it addresses vulnerable communities, it creates jobs, it saves money, it improves public health, and enhances resiliency. And it has a high reduction potential. So that's sort of how to read these. You don't have to use these icons. You don't even have to include the co-benefits, but just so you're aware, this is how it's structured, and this is how you would think about this if you do include this section of the document. Okay, stakeholder meetings guide. So this is also another resource, also up on the website. And I'll be jumping into this as well. In short, it's a series of guide sheets that very much is meant to prepare you for the stakeholder meetings. Who is involved, things to know ahead of time, questions and prompts for the meeting, potential KPIs, as I mentioned earlier. But the area that I think is most relevant to the strategies or the high impact actions are the resources section. So it has a lot of resources. I'll be going over those in more detail, and relevant climate smart communities actions. Okay, and then lastly is the ClearPath forecast emissions reductions tool. Caroline's going to be talking about that next, but before we jump into that, I'm just going to go over 2 of these tools in more detail. But before I do that, I think this might be a good point to just stop and see if there are any questions. Yeah, before I move on. No questions. Or Caroline, do you want to add anything? Is there anything I might have missed?
I think you covered it all. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, then I will jump right into the climate strategies workbook. Okay, so this is a spreadsheet. I've gone over this introduction already. These are the different columns that provide information for each of these subjects. So as you can see, it's broken down into different sectors, buildings and facilities, vehicle fleet, which also includes employee commute, solid waste and recycling, and natural resources. So I'll just go over it in not too much detail. And again, I'm happy to set up another meeting if you want to talk more about these. This is kind of the heart of the whole plan. So this is really important. We'll also provide you a blank spreadsheet if you want to start from scratch and fill it out. So, you know, again, this is just meant to be kind of a menu, but also just a starting point. So you can choose strategies from this spreadsheet, or you can come up with your own. So starting from the top left-hand corner here, you see the goal here. Goal number 1 for buildings and facilities is to reduce emissions from government buildings 40% by 2030, 85% by 2050. So again, that's aligned with the CLCPA goal that the state has passed. And these reductions are not only applied to the overall inventory, but to the specific sectors. And again, you can change these by sector, but the idea is that if you can meet these goals for each sector, then you can meet them overall. The objective here is to improve energy efficiency of government buildings. So we've included 4 objectives. The second is adopt policies to reduce emissions from government buildings, eliminate fossil fuel use in government facilities, and use renewable energy. And then as a further breakdown from the objective, you have these strategies or these actions that will get you to your objective. The first, and in our opinion, one of the most impactful is upgrading your HVAC equipment. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Again, if you have questions, you know, feel free to ask, but a key performance indicator for that would be the number of systems replaced. The emissions reduction potential is high. Some notes on that, you know, obviously if it's low, if you're replacing with fossil fuel infrastructure, but you would aim for high efficiency and or clean heating and cooling technology. We have a lot of resources on this. Certainly important to do your research here to make sure that that's something that your municipality is willing to undertake, or where to do it and how. So there's a fair amount of research associated with this. The cost is medium. It could be high depending on the size of the system you are replacing, but good to know there's CEC funding available among other funding sources. There's utility incentives, and this will save money over time. So this gives you a sense of kind of how this is structured. I'm just going to go over the actions in yellow, or the strategies in yellow, because those are generally, in our opinion, some of the highest impactful items or strategies to consider. And I should say there are a lot of strategies here, and I would not recommend including all of them. In fact, I would try and keep it to 5, maybe 7 max for each sector, because otherwise it gets a little overwhelming. And I think it's important that especially the first iteration of your climate action plan is achievable and not overwhelming for the municipality. So the second objective, adopt policies to reduce emissions from government buildings. The first action here is to, the first strategy here is to adopt green building and new construction standards. The KPI associated with that would be the number of retrofitted buildings, perhaps the number of proposed green building projects, or the number of buildings constructed. Again, you can edit these as you see fit. This has the potential to be a high emissions reduction action. If implemented, the cost is all over the map, frankly. Could be low, could be high. But the policy itself is a low cost item. And the only cost associated that really with is the time for researching and passing the policy. All right. So moving right along, if there are no questions, the next objective is to eliminate fossil fuel use in government buildings. So this could be, for instance, a strategy associated with this objective might be to create an energy efficiency or an HVAC replacement plan. So the KPI associated with this is the number of HVAC system replacements using clean heating and cooling technologies, or a % improvement to Energy Star scores, for instance. You can think of your own KPIs here, or you can use these, but the emissions reduction potential for this is high if implemented, and low to just create the plan. So there are some examples here. There are also some examples provided in the guidance document as well, which I'm going to go over after this. I haven't highlighted these, but the objective is to use renewable energy for government operations. So for instance, a strategy associated with that objective is to install solar panels in relevant locations. Caroline made an interesting point about solar. I don't know if you want to share that with the group in terms of its maybe less impactful nature than one might think, relevant to our municipality or our region in particular. Caroline, would you?
Yeah, sure. So I was just kind of, as I was starting to model reduction measures and think about that for you all, your grid region is already so clean, your electricity grid. So while installing solar is great, I'm totally for it. I'm not against it. It just becomes a little bit less impactful over time as your grid is already pretty clean, and then it's going to continue to get cleaner. So, thinking about where you want to spend your dollars, you might have a higher impact by installing heat pumps and electrifying your buildings and switching from fossil fuels to electrification where you're consuming already pretty clean electricity. So, some things to think about while you're selecting these strategies. And solar, it might depend on, how much money your local government has to spend. But just thinking about prioritizing in terms of those emissions impacts. And yeah, solar in particular is a great one, but because you're already on a clean grid, it might be a little bit less impactful than some other actions.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you, Caroline. And of course, that has to be weighed with kind of the practicality and ease of use and interest from the community. If there is community solar availability and it's, a no-brainer to sign your municipal buildings up for community solar, well then, probably something to consider. Okay, so moving right along, the next sector is vehicle fleet. Employee commute is considered part of that. Oh, also, I should say for those municipalities that do have a wastewater treatment plan or a water treatment plant, obviously those are really large energy users, and there are certainly a lot of actions associated with improving or reducing emissions from those facilities, one of which is to just upgrade the facilities. And I know that's a sort of a broad strategy, but just definitely one to consider if you have those facilities. Okay, so for vehicle fleet and employee commute, again, we have the goal as the same, the CLCPA goal. The objective is the first one is to reduce mileage driven. And the strategy here is to right-size the vehicle fleet, excuse me. And again, these are all just suggestions. Certainly you can come up with your own, but I think providing this kind of menu makes this a little bit less daunting. And we also have a lot of information on these different strategies. So I will be posting a lot of these to the website. Feel free to reach out. Again, happy to set up another meeting to go through these and really think through the details on what some of these actions entail. So a KPI for right sizing your vehicle fleet is the number of vehicles eliminated, or the percent of vehicles replaced or multi-purposed. The reduction potential is medium for this one. Again, I think this really depends. And which, obviously which vehicles are eliminated and what their usage was. The cost is low because you're just getting rid of a vehicle, but there obviously is a lot of staff time dedicated to figuring out this plan and making sure that it works for your municipality. And it could even save costs depending, on the situation. Increase fleet efficiency. So that obviously gets to prioritizing EVs or PHEVs, that's plug-in hybrids. Some KPIs associated with this action or this strategy are the percent of fleet using alternative vehicles, the percent of fleet proposed for conversion or converted to electric. You can even look at the overall amount of gallons saved of gas. So yeah, and then of course replacing traditional vehicles with advanced vehicles. So the first one is the policy, and then this is the actual replacement, which is the higher impact in terms of reducing emissions. So this is a KPI here is the number of vehicles and type and size, the percent of fleet replaced, or the number of gallons of fuel consumed. There is ZEV rebate funding available for this. There's actually ample funding for moving to electric vehicles, CEC funding. Without funding, this can be expensive, but again, there's a lot of great information, and I'm happy to provide it. I'll put it on the website as well around how to get grant funding to do this. Skipping down to the third objective, increase employee commutes made by public transit. Because you've all done an employee commute survey, this is definitely one worth considering. I think also for the communities that have a larger slice of their pie, that, in other words, the emissions of this sector were particularly high, then you might want to think about prioritizing this more. For instance, incentivizing low emissions commutes, biking, walking, public transport, etc. A KPI for that would be the number of commutes changed or the gallons of fuel saved. This can be a low cost to incent the program. It can be a higher cost if you provide more incentives, but certainly a lot to think about here in terms of how to move people away from driving to work. And, for a lot of people, this is the most impactful thing they can do. And from a government operations perspective, incenting each of your employees to do this, can have a pretty significant impact. So definitely one to consider. On the solid waste and recycling front, I have 4 objectives. The first is to increase recycling. I know that, again, this isn't exactly tied back to your inventory, because as you know, you didn't include recycling in your solid waste sector, but that doesn't mean you can't include it in your plan. It just means that you're going to have to come up with KPIs that are, sort of a little different from actually reducing emissions, which could be, for instance, in the case of recycling, a percent increase in recycling bins or the number of pounds of recycling collected. And I should say here that many of these actions, including this action, is also a Climate Smart Communities action. So I'll be going over this when I talk about the municipal guide, but it's worth looking, especially if you're trying to apply for bronze or silver certification, it's worth looking at how these actions align with CSC actions. And we do have a lot of information on that. So, so hopefully that will be helpful. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Other government initiatives, so passing an environmentally friendly purchasing policy is another potential strategy. Adoption of the policy is a key performance indicator. um, generally low cost. And then if you have a landfill, obviously that is a huge percentage of your greenhouse gas emissions, and looking at ways to reduce emissions from the landfill is important, either by trapping methane, if that hasn't been happening already, or installing a solar farm, for instance, on the top of a landfill. Again, might be relevant for some, might not be for others, but just putting it out there as a potential. And lastly, natural resources. So improving water efficiency in government buildings is a potential strategy, a potential objective. The strategy would be upgrading the water fixtures. A KPI would be the number of gallons of water consumed annually and the number of water fixtures replaced. The second objective, improve water efficiency of municipal property. So for instance, water smart landscaping could be a concept that if your municipality isn't already doing this. So reducing the amount of land irrigated, the number of rain barrels installed, and also using water sense irrigation controllers. In other words, sprinklers that only go off on certain times of day. And then the KPI for that one would be the gallons of water consumed annually. These tend to be low emission reduction potential strategies. So again, maybe not a priority, but if for some reason your municipality feels strongly about this, if it's thinking of doing it or has already done it recently, this can be a good one to include in your plan. Improve land management. So the objective would be converting land. The strategy would be converting to no mow or low maintenance. And the KPI would be the acres of land converted. For other government initiatives, a big one is to conserve natural areas. Obviously, trees provide an important carbon sink. So looking at the number or the acres of land acquired for carbon sequestration or the acres of floodplains preserved would be important KPIs if you do recommend this strategy. All right, I think this might be a good time to stop and just see again if there are any questions. I hope I'm not losing you all. I feel like this is a very dense overview of these tools, and I do encourage you to come to office hours if you have questions about any of these, but hopefully this tool will be helpful for you all.
I have a question, Mary.
Yeah, sure.
How I'm just thinking about this spreadsheet as a tool, and then in ClearPath, the tools that we're putting in our forecasting, and like which one do you recommend doing first, or how do those two things work together?
Yes, it's a great question. I think that because of the sophistication of the ClearPath tool, I would suggest starting with that. It's a really much more sophisticated tool than what I'm showing you. If you have actions that can be, if the reduction potential can be forecast, I'd certainly recommend starting with that. This can be sort of an adjunct, sort of once you've gone through that ClearPath process, you can look at the spreadsheet and see, which actions you haven't forecast for, or you can compare it and see kind of if it aligns, and hopefully it will just help you kind of think through really that forecast and what you might want to augment to your plan. Does that make sense?
Yes, and also as you were going through the spreadsheet, it struck me that we've been so focused on emissions reductions, right, so far with CAPI, but in looking at some of the items like the ones around water conservation or those are less about emissions reductions and about other aspects of climate change, I guess. So yeah, to what extent does our climate action plan really look at climate change holistically across resiliency as well as emissions reduction?
Right. So the first part of your question, I think I would I would argue that water reduction actually is a greenhouse gas emissions action only for municipalities, of course, that do have emissions associated with their, maybe they have a water treatment facility, or the electricity associated with pumps. So that's kind of where that comes from. Really, this plan should be entirely focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, with the exception of those that are undertaking the adaptation component of this program and of the climate action plan. Some municipalities do choose to include adaptation measures, but again, that's really sort of above and beyond, and not part of the kind of core climate action plan mandate, which is really should be focused on reducing emissions. So I would say that's really the guiding principle, and it's, I think, really important to stay focused on, because I know from experience in Hastings, we tend to have meetings and get really excited about a lot of actions and sort of forget to ask the question, but how much does this really reduce emissions? And you know, I'd really encourage you to try and stay focused on that goal. But thank you, that's a great question. Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, then I am going to jump into the second tool, which is the buildings and the stakeholder meetings guide. So this is specifically, I think, most relevant for the next 4 weeks, but hopefully you know, can provide value after that as well. But just so you're aware, this is also on the website. It is a document that HVRC has produced, and it is broken down by sector. So starting with the buildings and facilities meeting guide, and I apologize in advance, there's a lot of words on these pages, and you know, hopefully this can just be an introduction and you can go over this in your own timing off after the meeting and digest this in a little more detail. But each of the sectors here, so this is the buildings and facilities section, and then we have vehicle fleet transportation, we have waste and recycling, and we have natural resources. So each of these sectors provides information on who should be involved for the stakeholder meeting, things to know ahead of time, questions, prompts to discuss at the meeting, and potential KPIs. So I'm just gonna first off say this will help you think through whether, remember I mentioned at the beginning, maybe you want to have one meeting or you want to have multiple meetings. This will help you think that through, I think, in a little more detail. So for instance, for the buildings and facilities sector, you know, in addition to your climate smart communities leads or your CAPI team, as well as the chief elected official or CAPI municipal lead, you'll want to have the building manager or facility staff manager, whoever's in charge of managing buildings and facilities. There could be other relevant department heads as well, but you know, sort of the key person here outside of the usual suspects is really the building manager. If you look at the vehicle fleet, again, we have sort of the usual suspects, but in addition to that, the real, I think, key stakeholder here is either your DPW superintendent or your fleet manager, whoever is in charge, again, of managing your vehicle fleet. So if you don't know who that is, I definitely recommend you talk with your municipality about kind of who they think is or your key municipal lead, who they think is the most important person or key stakeholder in this discussion. Then moving down to the waste and recycling. Again, the key stakeholder here could be also your DPW superintendent, or there could be a facilities manager who manages your waste and recycling. But whoever is really the key point person for waste is the person who is most important, I believe, to have in this meeting or to be in this discussion. And lastly, for natural resources, the key stakeholder would be whoever oversees parks. Maybe it's the head of your DPW or Parks Department, could be Planning Department as well. So if you're a smaller municipality, there might not be that many people who you need to have involved. And you could easily do this in one meeting. For larger municipalities, you might want to break it up and have multiple meetings. You could have one large meeting and invite, say, the building manager from 10 to 10:30, and then the parks, the head of the DPW from 10:30 to 11, or whatever you could break it up that way too. But just some ideas to think about in terms of how to organize it. You should go into these meetings really prepared with information about these sectors. So for instance, in the buildings and facilities sector, some things to know ahead of time: square footage of your buildings with the highest emissions, what heating and cooling systems the buildings currently use, and the fuel sources for each building, percentage of indoor and outdoor LED lighting. Does the municipality own its streetlights? So I'll just say, not to scare you, you don't need to have all of the answers to these. Many of them you hopefully have from doing your inventory. So that's great prep work for having these meetings. And it's sort of why you do the inventory before you do the climate action plan. But I think the more information you have and the more ideas you have on what to talk about, the better. So potential prompts or questions at the meeting: have there been recent facility upgrades? And obviously, if you know the answers to these questions, you don't have to ask them, but when were those done? What was done? Are there relevant policies? And some of this you can research on your own before you go to the meeting. And just so you know, each of these links here is a link to the Climate Smart Communities action associated with this topic. So for instance, New York Stretch Code, that is a CSC action. And if you click on this link, it will take you to the action description. So you can see what is involved with it, and whether or not your municipality has gotten points for it, or if you choose to pursue it. We also have lots of examples of each of these. Yes, and I just realized I think New York Stretch Code might have actually been retired, so I'm not sure that's still in action, but I'll make a note to follow up on that one. So financing mechanism for energy efficiency, for instance, again, we have lots of information on this topic in particular. So, we'll be sure to post those, or if you have specific questions, please reach out. But again, getting back to the questions: has there ever been an energy audit? When? Do we have an energy management system? If so, which one? Does the municipality benchmark their buildings? You should have a lot of this information already, but if you don't, again, just make sure that you try and find out some of these answers before you go in, or if you don't know them, you can ask during the meeting. So again, lots of questions here around HVAC systems, the outdoor lighting, how to make the wastewater treatment plant, for instance, more efficient. Some of these are, more challenging than others, but good to kind of think through what is most relevant for your municipality. And again, this is all up to you. These are just suggestions. Here are some potential KPIs associated with this sector in general. We talked about this in terms of the workbook, because a lot of these are in the workbook, but KPIs are of particular interest to municipal officials. In most cases, the municipality is on the hook for these actions, right? If they're going to produce this plan, they're going to want to follow it, and they're going to want to make sure that they can, have realistic goals to follow. So, just, be sure that you talk through the KPIs during your meetings, and make sure that the key stakeholder feels comfortable with these KPIs, because again, it's really important that they're bought into this whole process, into the KPIs in particular. Here's a list of resources. I will be posting some of these to the website, but if you're interested, you can click on these links here in the document itself, or you, again, always feel free to reach out to me with more questions. For vehicle fleet, again, I mentioned the fleet manager, if you have, or DBW, superintendent is a key stakeholder here. And it's important to know if you've done a fleet inventory. I think most of you know that by this point, to look closely at the gas diesel usage. And for those of you that have vehicle fleet as one of the largest sectors of your greenhouse gas inventory, obviously these questions and these suggested objectives and KPIs are most relevant. We do have a lot of information on green fleet policies, lots of examples you can use if you're interested in potentially using that. I have anti-idling policy examples as well, although I think that becomes less important as we move more and more to EVs which don't idle. So so just something to consider. Employee commuting policies. Yep, we talked about that one already. So I think looking at also how the number of vehicles in the municipal fleet has changed over time is important when you think about if you can really reduce those numbers. Is that possible? And if so, which would make the most sense to reduce? I know in Hastings, we have a green fleet team that meets periodically to review these types of questions and kind of make a 5-year plan to figure out, okay, where can we reduce vehicles? And if so, what are the consequences, and how do we plan and prepare for that? And then also, of course, which cars are we going to move over to EVs or plug-in hybrids, and when's that going to happen? And the availability and the sophistication of the technology is changing so constantly that this is a lot of work to kind of keep up on these things. And I know it can be very controversial. It just was at a board meeting last night in Hastings about doing this work in Hastings, and we're very committed to our green policy of only replacing cars with EVs, but it's tricky right now because there's just not a lot of availability, especially for pursuit-ready police vehicles. But I'm happy to talk to people more about that if you're interested. We did purchase a pursuit-ready Mach-E vehicle in Hastings. Besides it being a little small, the police loved it. Unfortunately, it was in an accident and it's out of commission, but I think we're going to get another one, hopefully, and a replacement vehicle for that, and maybe even another Mach-E. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more with whoever's interested in talking EVs, which is kind of my personal passion. Clearly, it's important to think about EV charging infrastructure if you are going to be purchasing EVs. Do you have enough charging stations? You think about level 1, level 2. And I know Terrytown, who's part of the Westchester cohort, did a very interesting evaluation of their routes in terms of sanitation pickup in order to see if they could make their routes more efficient. And they did, and they ended up saving, I believe it was about 15% greenhouse gas emissions in that sector as a result of a more efficient waste pickup route. So definitely something to consider. And then an end-of-life vehicle policy. Do you have one? What is it? Can you just make the most use of all the vehicles that you do have without having to buy new ones? And then we have a bunch of KPIs here. I'm not going to go through them. Lots of resources as well, including some fleet management systems that are kind of interesting to explore if that's something that you choose to include in the plan. For waste and recycling, this is important to have your DPW superintendent or your facilities manager in the meeting. Obviously, if you have a closed landfill, that's going to be really critical to evaluate, just because there's so much emissions associated with those landfills, even if they closed in the 70s. And thinking about what you can do there, I'm sure there's a lot more than I'm not even aware of. So it would be interesting. And I actually have put municipalities that have a landfill together in those mini cohorts. So hopefully the cohort with the landfills can discuss this in more detail amongst yourselves, but hopefully that can be something addressed in your plan. There is a green purchasing program that I also highly recommend that you check out. It provides recommendations on procurement for all sorts of supplies that are relevant to a government. Okay, Michael asks, is it really expected these meetings will happen in the next month? In addition to everything else, there are local elections coming up. So that, I don't know if you want to expand on that, Michael. I totally hear you. I know it's a lot to ask. I think my response would be just do the best you can. We are hoping to have a draft cap ready by the end of the year. So it's a tight time frame. But again, I think just do the best you can. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that, or?
No, I mean, I don't really need to expand upon it. I don't think it's likely that we're going to be able to get that kind of input, in the next 4 weeks. At least here, there's a lot of other moving pieces. I'm sure it's not that different anywhere else. And then there's going to be the challenge of getting everyone's attention on this, given all of the other stuff that local officials are kindly thinking about probably at this, over the next few weeks. So I think this is going to be a challenge to do. Well, we'll do our best, obviously, but I don't know that the timeline will work for us.
We have budget season right now too, so I don't know that we're
course,
going to get
right.
it done either.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I totally hear you. It's going to be tough. I mean, I'm here to help, but to the extent that I can. I think virtual meetings oftentimes are easier for people. Again, grouping them maybe in one big meeting, if that's possible. Again, it's probably not so much for your municipality, Michael, and maybe not even you, Liz, but if you can't get it done, you can't. But again, we hope that at least in the next 8 weeks, even that these meetings can be held, because they are really important, I think, in order to draft a plan, right? You need this feedback.
All right, just to clarify, these are
Yeah.
public meetings or these are internal meetings?
These are key stakeholder meetings with the government. So they're not open to the general public, but they might include different members of the department staff, as well as volunteers on the CAPI team.
So in theory, I can make it a part of my regularly scheduled department meeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That might work. All right, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Great idea. Okay, so for natural resources, this key stakeholder, probably head of your parks department or maybe DPW, whoever is overseeing your parks and land. Because we didn't include this in the inventory, maybe important to kind of read this in a little bit more detail, and to do maybe a bit more research if you do want to include this sector. And again, totally optional. But some of the questions to think about or to know ahead of time: what land does the municipality own or oversee? How is that land managed? Wooded, ball fields, open space. You might have the opportunity to move to change the landscaping on these lands, or to pass a resolution to protect them as parks, which is the most protection, as opposed to some of the other zoning choices. Also knowing what studies have been done on this space. So for instance, any NRIs, the natural resources inventory, or comp plan or LWRP, and also existing water conservation efforts. So those are all relevant for this sector. Conserving water in your municipal building, again, like Vanessa pointed out, it's kind of a low emissions reduction potential, but also not that hard, and something that is a CSE action, and not that expensive. So looking at water efficient fixtures is something to consider. How do we irrigate the property? Water smart landscaping is another CSC action. Again, not hugely reducing from emission standpoint, but does save water, and that has co-benefits. So it's important to think about tree planting as well. I'm going to skip over these a little bit for time's sake, but I think they're pretty straightforward here. Oh, can you guys please mute? Thank you. And then potential KPIs, and here we have some resources. Again, I'm going to try and post a lot of these to the website, so hopefully you can just go through them if you're interested at your leisure. All right, I think that we are through with this. I don't know if there are any last questions. If not, I am going to hand it over to Caroline to talk a little bit about the forecasting for emissions reductions for specific actions.
Thanks, Mary. It looks like I might need screen sharing ability.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, okay, everyone should be able to see my screen now. And I'll just zoom in a little so it's easier to see. Okay, so this is kind of a continuation from your business as usual forecast. So the point where I'm starting today is you created your business as usual forecast. It's done, maybe checked by myself or Mary, and you're ready to start adding reduction strategies to your forecast to see the impacts of various strategies. So to do that, as usual, you're going to go to your government track in ClearPath. And then instead of your inventories module or forecasts, you're going to go to this planning module. And I should note the planning module it's very connected to the forecasting module in Bickley's wizard tool. It's just a little bit of a different way of getting there because we're having some technical difficulties on the wizard side of things. So this is just kind of a workaround to allow you to continue the work, and everything will appear, between the work you did in wizard and the work you do here. So just a little bit of background, but yeah, so you're in your planning module and you'll scroll down and it looks a lot like the forecasting and your inventory module where you have a list of what we call planning scenarios down here, just like your inventories or your forecasts. And kind of similarly, this is how you would get to them, how you would go back to the planning scenario to edit it or delete it. The difference here, though, is that we have emission reduction goals, new reduction strategy, new planning scenario. So to create a new planning scenario, I'm going to click that button and you'll add a name. I usually like to, just name it really clearly so that it's distinguished from your 2030 business as usual forecast. I think that's one of the most important pieces. You might want to, label it local government operations 2030 forecast and just call out that it's your reduction measure analysis. And then this drop-down menu allows you to connect this planning scenario to the business as usual forecast you created. So I know I have a couple here because this is my demo account, but I know which one I want to select. So I select the correct one, and then I click create planning scenario. And it pulls you to this view, which we'll come back to, but just to give you a little bit of an overview, the graph that appears here should look the same as your business as usual forecast graph. So you should be familiar and everything should look the exact same. This graph does work the same as in Wizard. So we have carbon dioxide equivalent emissions on the left here, and then we have your year-over-year view of emissions on the below here. And same thing, you can deselect so you can focus on certain sectors. yeah, it's really all the same. And then you can always export this graph using that 3-bar button as well. So all kind of the same as the business as usual forecast, but it is different at the bottom. This is where once we input some reduction measures, you'll be able to add them to your forecast here, which we'll come back to in a minute. So now I've set up my planning scenario and I am ready to start adding reduction measures. So I'm actually going to go back to the planning module, and I am going to go to this, and actually I should call out, you'll see that the planning scenario I just created appeared here at the bottom. So we're all set there, and this is how you would navigate back to that page I was just on, is through the edit records. But now I want to start actually adding reduction strategies. So I'm going to click new reduction strategy. And this is, I kind of think of this as similar to the to your inventory, where you're adding calculators in a sector. So this is kind of one view of all of those calculators. But obviously these calculators are projecting emissions reductions rather than, you know, an addition of emissions to your inventory. So on the left here, we have all of the available calculators, which is a long list, hard to sort through. So luckily we have this filter feature in this gray box. And there are two different ways to filter these out and find what you're looking for. There are all these tags like actions that support green jobs or reduce local air pollution. But I typically like to go by sector in ClearPath, just because that's kind of how everything tends to be organized. So it's easiest for me to think of it like that. So you can just select the ones you want to view and find the correct calculator that you want to add a new reduction strategy for. I should call out that once you do start adding all of your reduction strategies in here, they will appear on this right side, like so, kind of, again, similar to that inventory view you have. So today I'm just going to show you all one reduction strategy, because we could go into a ton of them and they all have different inputs. That a lot of the inputs are going to be up to you and kind of figuring out, you know, how much, for example, how many buildings you want to electrify or how many solar panels you want to add to a building, those types of questions. So it's hard for me to go over all of them. So again, come to office hours. Let me help you through all of these, because they are really useful to use and there is a lot that goes into them. So I wouldn't be surprised if you all have questions, but yeah, so let's start with just adding an action. And I'm going to show you this convert facilities space heating to heat pumps. So this really is going to be the calculator you use to model building electrification. So Mary was talking about the HVAC upgrades and conversions, and this is where you would do that. But this is just for heat pumps, so only building electrification is really how you should see this calculator, which is really the most practical way to reduce building emissions from HVAC systems, and also the most cost efficient, because heat pumps have come way down in cost and they are much more efficient. So you typically see them, you know, as a lower cost to local government after they've been installed and in use. So they have a good return on investment or payback rate. So we are ready to add our reduction strategy, and it looks just like a lot of the inventory calculators, which is very handy. So we're going to start with naming it. I like to organize these as I'm adding them, because you might end up adding a lot to that last screen and it just helps organization. So I usually write the sector. Yeah, it just appears here. So I usually write the sector, buildings and facilities, electrification. And then if you have multiple fuels between, you know, different types of building and heating systems, you might want to distinguish by fuel type. So let's just pretend we're electrifying a natural gas building. And then next important piece is factor sets. So we didn't cover this as much in the inventory, so some of you may or may not be familiar with this. So I'm just going to quickly show you how you find what you used in your inventory for this, because that will help a lot with, yeah. making these calculators and ensuring that they're correct. So to find your grid electricity factor set, I am going to go to my inventory. And when I'm doing this, I do tend to have a lot of tabs open because it can be easier to switch back and forth, but you can do it however you want. So to find the factor set for electricity, go to your inventory, scroll down. Yeah, just really go back in your inventory, find one of your building and facility electricity records, and you'll see the factor set right at the top here. So it's this MRO West 2021, and the same one is selected already. So I know I'm good to go on that front. Fuel prices is a little bit more advanced. It's not needed to calculate emissions reductions. It's more for estimating cost of the action. So you don't need to worry about that. If you ever want to look into it, reach out and we'll help you figure that one out. And then global warming potential. This is the one that you selected in your inventory under the parameters. So that kind of initial inventory setup process. And everyone should be using this IPCC fifth assessment 100-year values. So just make sure that that one is selected. And then as you scroll down, you'll see it's very similar to your inventory calculators. We have an inputs table and an outputs table. So, and then we have notes at the bottom. So for building electrification, the main input you need to worry about is this current natural gas use of buildings to be retrofitted. So if you know specific buildings that can or will likely be electrified by 2030, you just need to go into your inventory and find the total natural gas usage from those buildings and enter that here. So another way to say that, if you wanted to fully electrify all of your buildings by 2030, which would be a bit aggressive, probably not feasible, but it would be great if you did. But if you wanted to fully electrify all of your buildings, you would want to use your end of business as usual forecast value, which I will show you as well, because I do think that can be very helpful for adding your reduction strategies and planning scenarios. So in order to find that value, you are going to go to forecast instead and go back to your business as usual forecast in Wizard. And just like before, we're going to click edit in Wizard. And I also think this is just kind of useful information for you to all have. So that's also why I'm showing it to you now. But if you want to find the projected emissions for each sector, there's this little export button that you all may not have noticed until now. But this export button below the graph will allow you to export an XML file of the projected emissions and projected activity data, or for buildings and facility, the projected energy consumption values that were created in your business as usual forecast. And I won't show you the table just because it's pretty straightforward. It's just a few columns, but know that that's where that information is. And you could use it to fill in some of the inputs in these reduction strategies. So that is one way to do it is full electrification using that business as usual forecast value. But let's say I just know of 3 out of my 5 buildings that are going to be electrified. And I go into my inventory and I find that that is equivalent to 10,000 MMBTU of natural gas. So that is the total natural gas that those 3 buildings consumed in 2019. Because that's the current gas use of those buildings that I want to retrofit by 2030. So I enter that value there. And then this furnace or boiler efficiency value, you can use the 80% default. This is just a US national piece of data. On average, furnaces and boilers in the US are 80% efficient. If you know the building that you're planning to electrify and you know that furnaces efficiency rate, you can enter that in. Like for example, I know just off the top of my head that most new natural gas furnaces are more like 95% efficient. So that's the type of information you could add there. And that is something you could ask your stakeholders. You could ask the building manager if they know the efficiency of the furnace or boiler that they have in that building. But otherwise, just use 80%. That's totally okay to use. You know, this is an estimation. It doesn't have to be exact. And the same actually goes for this heat pump performance factor. This just has to do with the efficiency of heat pumps themselves. So 8.2 is also a US national default value that you can definitely use as to create these estimations. If you want to find a more specific value for your location, just do some research on this value in your region, and something should come up. We can talk about that later if anyone's interested, but yeah, so now all of our inputs are done. Luckily, this one's pretty straightforward. There aren't a ton of inputs. And then once that's completed, we get to our outputs table. And so this will show, you know, the natural gas savings. We'll end up saving this amount over time, or each year, I should say. And then, you know, CAPI does some calculations and estimates your electricity change, because now that you're not using as much natural gas, you're going to be using more electricity. So it has to kind of add that back in to your emissions forecast. And yeah, so that's kind of the summary of that. Cumulative, you check this if it's going to be saving, if it's kind of added on emissions reductions over time. So let's say you are electrifying 10,000 buildings with, so how do I explain this? If you are going to electrify a new building each year, and that's going to save you 10,000 MMBTU of natural gas, you check cumulative, because in ClearPath that will allow you to say, you know, it'll accumulate those emissions reductions. So 10,000 MMBTU of natural gas converted to electricity each year. But I know we're just kind of doing a one and done situation for this one. And I should call out these question marks do talk a little bit more about some of these. It depends, but we can talk about that during office hours if you need more help and are wondering. So at this point, we are done with this calculator. We are ready to click save. You might want to add notes on the buildings, like say this is your town hall and firehouse converted to electric. You might want to write something like that. And then click save. And you'll see that the reduction strategy appears over here. So it's saved, that's great. You could continue to add reduction strategies at this point. I would, however, recommend, especially with the first couple you create, maybe going back to the planning scenario view, as I'm showing you now, so that you can see if that measure how you inputted those pieces of data, if it worked and if it's making sense. So go back to your scenario, which is the same one that I created initially. Go to edit records. And you'll notice it's not appearing yet. That is because I have to add it. So I select this drop-down menu, find the reduction measure that I just created, select it, and click add. And now it'll appear at the bottom. You'll notice it hasn't impacted my forecast yet. So in order to do that, you have to select your start and end year. So I would recommend, most strategies shouldn't start until at least 2024, because you want to think about when they're actually going to be implemented, right? So we did a 2019 inventory, or in this case, I did a 2021 inventory, but any action that I'm modeling here most likely will not be implemented until at least 2024, maybe some not even until 2027 or later on. So you can decide which year the action is going to actually take place or start if it's a year-over-year action, and then select your end year, which is going to be 2030. But it's up to you for those start and end years. You might say that your buildings are going to be electrified by 2027. So you can select that end year. And then to actually make it show a reduction, you need to click active and then save. And you should see, maybe I didn't do enough, but we can, sometimes it won't be obvious that it had an influence. So I like to just zoom into that sector. And we're starting with about 7,000 metric tons. And remember, it was just active. So these emissions should go back up when I click save. And you'll see they did. Clearly, I should have, I should be electrifying more buildings. I didn't look at the natural gas use from this inventory. So that's probably why it's not having a very large impact. But you can see it did slightly change. And what's nice is if you add this action and you're like, well, that didn't really impact my emissions as much as I was hoping, you can easily click this edit button, go back, and let's say I'm like, okay, these 2 buildings weren't enough. Now I want to do 4 buildings. And so that's double the amount of natural gas savings. Click save. Sorry, and then go back to your planning scenario. And in order for it to actually impact your graph, you're going to have to refresh the page after editing and saving that action. And now it should, it went down almost 100 metric tons. So again, not a lot. You might want to go back in and continue to play around with those numbers. I'm trying to think. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, once you are adding in your reduction strategies, if you want to look at the emissions projections after adding those reduction strategies, you can use these various export to CSV buttons to see the data behind ClearPath and what those emissions will actually be in 2030 with those reduction measures added to your planning scenario. Okay, that was very quick because we don't have a ton of time, but are there any questions on all of this before I pass back to Mary?
A question. What if we don't have natural gas?
You don't have, it doesn't have to be natural gas. I should show you, great question. So there are there are different units. So you might have to do some conversion from your inventory. Actually,
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
So this just needs the fuel. It does say natural gas. I'm pretty sure you can enter other types of fuels, but I might need to double check that. But I think it doesn't matter because as long as you have the correct units of energy usage and enter it here, then it's still calculating the same emissions reductions, even though it says natural gas. But let me know what fuels you have, Vanessa, and I can double check with our tech lead on that.
Yeah, it's like fuel oil.
Okay. Yeah, and what's nice about ClearPath is if you go back to your inventory, I'll show you real quick. If you go back to your inventory and go, I know this is natural gas too, but say this was fuel oil, in the outputs table below, no matter what type of fuel it is, it will calculate it in MMBTU for you. So you can always use that to find that value.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, well, this probably was a lot, so please come to office hours. Let me help you through some of these strategies. As you probably noticed, there are quite a lot. There certainly ClearPath, has its limitations on reduction strategies it can model, and that even makes sense to model in some cases. So the list that Mary is sending out and other recommended actions that that could be included in your CAP may not be in ClearPath. But ClearPath should have the majority of it should have all high impact actions, and really the ones that will have the most impact on your inventory, or that can actually be calculated in ClearPath, because it does have its limitations. But yeah, that is all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Caroline. So moving right along, we're going to break out into small groups, and I have assigned you each to a different mini group. And this is a group that I'm hoping you guys can use to help you through this CAP process. So I encourage you to reach out to the other members of your mini cohort and to set up a meeting. And I'll send an email after this meeting introducing you all, and hopefully you guys can take it from there. But I think this group will be helpful not only for brainstorming and talking through some of these high impact action item ideas, but also as a draft reader for your CAP when that time comes. So I will let you all take it from there. I've assigned you to breakout rooms based on these groups, I believe. So if I made any mistakes, obviously just raise your hand and let me know if you can. I'm going to be in the group 1 meeting, but I'll see if I can hop around a little bit. And then we'll report back, and I'll quickly go over your homework. All right. Any questions, or should I just open the breakout rooms? All right, let's open the breakout rooms. Oh, okay. Robert Arthurs.
Is Mita.
Hi, Mita. Sorry, I put you in the wrong one because I wasn't sure.
Oh.
I wasn't sure which you should be in, and I realized actually.
Yeah, I didn't, well, never mind. Here I am.
That's all right. And Ben, I realize you should be in group 2. I apologize.
Oh, I should?
No, Ben, City of Beacon, not you, Mita. I'm going to see if I can I'm going to see if I can reassign you, Ben. I'm not a huge expert on this, but let me just try to see if I can do that quickly.
I thought I was in one. Group 1.
Yes, this is group 1. Okay, I just reassigned Ben to group 2.
Oh.
Okay, so here we should have Town of Rhinebeck, which I believe is you, Emma, right?
Yes, that's me.
Okay, good. The Town of Amenia, which is you, Alana. And the Town of Pleasant Valley, which is you, Mita. Fantastic. Okay, so one person from each of you, each of the municipalities. And the reason that you all are together is because all of you have a landfill, I believe. Isn't that right?
No, we don't have a landfill. We may have little landfills here and there, but we don't have a big one. Or do we have a functioning landfill?
Yeah, I believe that, and I'll double check this. I believe that you, in your inventory, you did report a capped landfill from a while ago, which
Really? Oh, okay.
I'll double check, but I think that was part of the,
Okay.
or maybe it was just the amount of the solid waste in general, not necessarily a landfill.
Yeah, all our garbage and recycling is handled by Royal.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. And I know that both Alana and Emma, you both are new to this process, but hopefully you're, getting up to speed and jumping right in. How did it go today? Were you completely overwhelmed?
No, it was good to learn absolutely. I was wondering these things before this meeting.
Oh, good. Okay. And Emma, what is your background? Are you like Jamie, kind of on the sustainability track?
Yeah, I was working at C mostly in their like organization development, like marketing communications, but I was always hoping to move more into sustainability and climate planning.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, great. And have you been able to take a look at the inventory report that Jamie did?
Yes, I did. It looks great. And the landfill is definitely the top priority for Rhinebeck, town of Rhinebeck.
Okay. And Alana, I know that I have not sent you the report yet from Armenia, so that's my bad, but hopefully after this meeting, it will make more sense too. You can see sort of by sector how Armenia is broken down, and you'll see that their landfill is a huge portion of their greenhouse gas emissions. Like the town of Rhinebeck, I believe it's something like 90+% of the overall inventory numbers. So, it'll be important to think about kind of what can be done about the landfill, if anything. I know Armenia has 7 other landfills too. It's kind of crazy. I don't really know the whole history behind why Armenia has so many landfills, but because only one of them is municipally owned, only that one needed to be included, just as a little context. So Mita, how is it going for you so far? Did you read the inventory report? And if so, did you have any comments or thoughts?
Well, we're a little overwhelmed,
Yep.
and we have a big election coming up, and I'm glad somebody mentioned elections. But fortunately, it's possible that Mary Albrecht will be the supervisor. Don't tell anybody.
Ooh, wow, that would be fantastic, right?
But yeah, so that's our hope, and then things will work out. Where's our landfill? We don't have a functioning landfill.
No, it's
It's
capped. I'll look it up for you right now while we're
It's a
talking.
capped. Okay. Because I know at one point there really was. I think my mother used it in the old days.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of municipalities did in the old days.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they had to have they had to have somewhere.
Hastings
where you
did
just-
too. I mean, we called it the dump back then. I mean, I wasn't around, but that's what everyone says. And we capped it, and I think we just squeezed in terms of not having to report it, but that's how things were done back then, right? You just kind of found a place and threw a lot of stuff in it. But it's amazing to me that these landfills were capped in the 70s and they're still producing so many emissions. It's kind of fascinating. And I know that I believe, I shouldn't say I know, but I believe that both Armenia and the town of Rhinebeck have pipes, so methane is coming out of the landfills, but I don't believe that anything's being done with that methane. So the question is whether there could be some sort of system to capture the methane and even either use it, like flare it, or use it to produce energy. So that's kind of, I think, a huge area for research. And I don't know if Emma and Alana, you guys are up for that task, but it would be fabulous to kind of get more information around that, like what solutions are out there, like who's doing what, and if there's any way that could be like not only a feasible but economically viable solution. It would be great to get some sort of a sense of that going into these stakeholder meetings. I know for both of you it's and you too, Mita, it's a little challenging being volunteers and not being working for the local government. I think Jamie navigated that pretty well, Emma. So hopefully you can too, and working with, is it Liz who's the supervisor?
Yeah.
Yeah, Elizabeth. So hopefully Elizabeth Spinzia will, she'll help you kind of navigate this. But I think a good first step would be to really touch base with her and explain to her, kind of based on what you heard today, what needs to be done and how to structure that stakeholder meeting and who needs to be there, and hopefully you guys could set it up in the next month or so. I think, my guess is that she'll want to have it be virtual and have it be one meeting, knowing Elizabeth, but we'll see, we'll see. And, you might not get everyone's feedback, but at least if you can get kind of the critical people, that will be important. And Elizabeth, I think, is one of the critical people. So, I think if she's been pretty supportive so far, so hopefully she'll continue to lend her support to this process. Alana, I think we're gonna have to really work with Vicky very closely to get her support to set up this meeting in Armenia. And I'm happy, I'll help you. Don't worry, this won't be all on your shoulders. But I think if we could set up a virtual meeting, that would be ideal. And Stacy Mandel, who's another volunteer in Armenia, I think has maybe jumped back into the process. So hopefully she can join us as well and ask some of these critical questions and make sure that they lend their feedback. And Mita, I think in terms of Pleasant Valley, if Mary could be more involved, I know it sounds like she's really busy because she's probably campaigning and trying to run for office, but it would be fantastic to have her support. And I know you guys have had some issues with the supervisor, so it might take someone like Mary or Mary Beth to really kind of bridge that divide. What do you think? Is it
Yeah.
realistic?
Yeah, I think yeah, but it's a very small town.
Right.
I mean, we're finding out how small it is. So we'll talk about who the stakeholders might be.
Okay. Okay, great. Do you guys have a board, a task force, a Climate Smart Communities meeting coming up, or I can't remember the name of your group. What is it Climate Smart Communities Task Force?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think next week.
Next week? Oh, perfect. Okay.
Is that right? But I think Sandra's gonna get in touch with you.
Yes, we've actually set up a meeting, I believe, for Friday. So
Mhm.
you're welcome to join us if you want, or she can report back to the group in terms of what we talked about. But yeah, I'm holding my breath.
So you're gonna with Sandra, you're going to go over a lot of this stuff. Presumably she'll read through the website.
Yep. Yep, that's the plan. I'll go over the stuff and we'll talk about next steps and who should be at the meeting, when it should happen more or less, and how to approach Mary or Mary Beth about this, and then of course drafting that list of high impact action items. So that we can go to the meeting prepared with a list and get some feedback on it, so that the group, the municipality feels like they're really engaged and bought into this whole process. Yeah, do you guys have any questions? Is there anything that is occurring to you? I see now we only have 20 more seconds, so I apologize for asking this. It's such a late hour. Oh yeah.
How soon would you like us to have our meeting, either with Vicky or with Amelia? Would that be in the next
I
month
think
or so?
I think next week we should have a meeting with Vicky.
Okay.
I did email her again yesterday. I haven't, because I didn't hear back from her, and then the meeting hopefully will take place in the meeting with the stakeholders will happen in the next, hopefully, couple weeks, but we'll see we'll see what she says.
Okay.
All right, so time is up and I will see you back in the main room. Thank you.
Okay.
Here they come. Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
So Mary, we were not with the people that were in the list you showed us.
Yeah, I wasn't either.
My apologies. Some technical snafus there, but I will send a follow-up email and I will include the people who you should be with, and then hopefully you guys can set up a time to meet on another occasion. My apologies. I thought I'd done that correctly, but still learning. All right, well, I'm going to jump right into homework because we don't have too much time left. But if anyone has any questions while I'm loading, please feel free to shoot. Oh, we have someone joining back in here. Let's see. Oh, it's Vanessa. Great. Hi, Vanessa. All right, so homework, it's a lot, and I understand, I totally get it. There's a lot going on. So if this doesn't happen by the next meeting, this will be your homework for the following meeting. So just keep that in mind. But really the key homework item is the stakeholder meeting and preparing for it. So you should meet with your Climate Smart Communities Task Force, your CAPI team, or your Conservation Commission, or your small group to figure out really what draft high impact action items you want to hone in on to talk about in the stakeholder meeting. So some of the things that will help in deciding that are your clear path forecasts. And again, these are, nothing here is mandated. I think if you can do the forecast, great. If you want to just stick to using the spreadsheet because you're completely overwhelmed and don't think that you have the capacity or bandwidth to do that, you can go with just using the Excel spreadsheet and some of the stakeholder meeting guides. If you can fill out the public outreach and engagement plan, I'd very much appreciate that. That's something that DEC wants to see everyone do as part of just making sure that you're doing some outreach. I can even go over it with you in a meeting and take notes and fill it out for you as we talk. It shouldn't take a long time at all. The climate action plan template, if you can just review that. Again, it's on the website now. I'll put it in each of your SharePoint folders just so you have a sense of what's in that template. There also are some example action items in the template, so you might want to look at some of those. ICLEI has included them just to spark thoughts and ideas, not because it's it's just example text, but they are interesting. The stakeholder meetings guide, I think that will help you in terms of how to prepare for and how to guide the meeting. And lastly, as I said, the workbook with the strategies in it. I will, that's uploaded already, the one that's filled out, and I'll upload a blank one if you want to start from scratch. But either way, hopefully you can use that to help come up with that draft list. And as I think I mentioned several times, please do enlist your CAPI municipal lead to help you. Their support is most needed at this moment, and hopefully they'll go to bat for you. So that's it for me. We have 5 more minutes. I don't know if anyone has any questions or thoughts, or whether you want to take that time back. All right, I don't see any hands or any questions or anything in the chat, so I will let you all go. Have a great next 4 weeks, and I will talk to you all in October.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
And Mary,
yeah,
just confirming again, next month we're on Zoom and November will be in person. I just want to
that's
make
right.
sure.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
All right, take care.